Tonight, we'll begin with a conversation I had with Sean Penn on January 10th, just a few days after he returned from Iraq. After the Sean Penn conversation, we'll return to the studio, review some recent videotape from Iraq, and discuss the issues with our studio guests. Stay tuned. About your trip, I know that you come from a family that was politically involved. I know your father was politically blacklisted. Did the knowledge that your father had been prevented from doing his work, did that have an effect on you?
You know, I think that it just didn't really hit me until later in life, and then where it really hit home was at his funeral, because when the honor guard folded the flag and reached across my lap to hand it to my mother, I found myself surprised by the emotion that it struck in me, because I immediately was surprised to find out that I had been consistently aware of his pride in the country and his pride in his service, despite the fact that after he came back, the country that he'd risked his life for wouldn't permit him to work. And so the way that that's registered for me is I thought a lot about just how much bitterness he seemed to avoid. He didn't have it. He was a sort of die-hard patriot to the end.
Before we talk about the trip itself, you said, "My trip is to personally record the human face of the Iraqi people so that their blood, along with that of American soldiers, would not be invisible on my hands." What does it mean to say that, so that their blood would not be invisible on my hands?
I am a believer in this cliche that we deserve the government we get. I look back and I didn't work hard enough to keep this, as one individual, to keep this administration from taking power. And so I stand here as a citizen of a country whose president is George Bush. And those decisions are ultimately reflective of my choices, despite the fact that I may not agree with them. And so I do believe that the blood will be on all of our hands, the blood of American soldiers, the blood of Iraqis, and the likelihood of blood of American civilians when it comes to the terrorist backlashes that are likely to follow.
So is this the same as saying that even if we're in opposition to the policies of our government, there's no way to avoid taking responsibility in some manner for their actions?
That's my view.
So you've obviously read the reaction. There was a lot of flackery in the press, a lot of sniping, a lot of snide stuff. What does this level of flackery tell you about the media? Does it tell you anything about the media, and why do you think they were so provoked?
Well, you have this. I don't know that it's what you call a new media. How do you answer this question? I'm a filmmaker and an actor. If I were a filmmaker making a film on Joe McCarthy today, I wouldn't think twice. I'd ask Bill O'Reilly to play the part. You've got this flock's the wrong word, harem, under Rupert Murdoch, which has a political agenda, but also has an economic agenda having to do with the kind of bluster that the black and white position can dramatize in a way that a realistic and thoughtful position cannot. We see that the Democrats are suddenly struggling to find a spokesman who's got that kind of payoff for the audience, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because it's that bluster that's the very nature of the deceit. But it's also that bluster that sells in sound bites, and so that's what we're up against today. But I don't think that defines the American public's ability to ultimately recognize the truth when they hear it. I think that there's a long history of this country's inability to always know when they're being lied to, and I think that we're under that spell right now. But I have a lot of faith in this country's ability to always know when they're being told the truth, and so those bits and pieces of truth that filter through this system of media that we're being assaulted with right now, I think finally we'll get to the people.
Well, when I was young, growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, New York had something like 6 newspapers. There was the Herald Tribune, the Journal American, the New York Post, the Daily News, the Daily Mirror, the New York Times, and the Herald Tribune. And they all had a different political agenda and a different slant. And they've all been kind of consolidated and corporatized. And now there are maybe 5 corporations which own 95% of the media outlets in the United States. Mm-hmm. This leads me to my next question. So any artist who's well known somehow gets celebrityized, and it creates a kind of double bind. It means that your entire life is subject to be a product to help sell media. And unwittingly, I mean, I know that you're not a person who courts publicity, but do you think that this is one reason why the media reacts so much when a celebrity gets out of the box? Because the celebrity is kind of like the hinge of a vast empire of magazines, radio stations, TV shows, movies, and suddenly, instead of selling product, you're questioning the underpinnings of the very system that supports it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's no secret to anybody that they want to dismiss any celebrity that has a dissenting point of view as an airhead celebrity. It's sort of the way that you know when you define, for example, the word conspiracy is immediately radicalized in the vocabulary, therefore dismissible. And I think that's something that's been true in the American vocabulary since the assassination of John Kennedy, and perhaps before, but certainly in terms of real direct impact now. So the very nature of the word celebrity is a dismissive word, and it's something I think that we're up against. But I just would refer them if they're worried about actors speaking their mind. I would refer them to Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm. Seems fair enough. Let's talk about Iraq. The first UN Assistant Secretary General and humanitarian coordinator in Iraq was a guy named Dennis Holliday, and he resigned. And when he resigned, he said, quote, "We're in the process of destroying an entire society. It's as simple and terrifying as that. It's illegal and immoral." You were there. What did you see?
I saw the most devastated land and people that I'd ever seen. There's no question that, and it's something that's going to have to be addressed in a lot of ways. I think that there's no question, but that the sanctions have had the reverse effect that they were intended to have. I think that they have added to the allegiance to Saddam Hussein, who's clearly a monster. That it has made the United States the demon and not their leadership. And it's also now already beyond, this is something that's going to take decades of reparation. There's a direct link between nutrition and education. You're going to have an entire generation of kids who've been raised under these sanctions, who go to school with nothing in their stomach. The schools have broken windows and no temperature regulation. You have 60 to a class the size of this room. Teachers are being paid $3 to $5 a month. And that's the next generation. And on the other side of it, you also have an entire culture of black marketeers who would otherwise be the thinkers and strategists of a country in the future, and instead they're the players and manipulators. And whatever happens in Iraq is what we're going to be dealing with in the future. The other big question, and it's one that I've been questioning it myself about, is that you have a 60% Shiite population in a country that we're talking about democratization. So in that case, if they're democratized, you're then going to give leadership over to a majority that would agree with the kind of Islamic fundamentalism that we've dealt with in Iran all of these years. And so is that really what we want? It's a question to be asked. Is that going to serve anybody's purpose in the short term? Certainly in the long term, we haven't got a better program than democracy to offer. But in terms of some kind of transition of power, it's going to be a big question. And with all the other issues that have come out of the sanctions, We've got a real beast on our hands without dropping a bomb.
So I know that you're a really shrewd person. You think about things strategically a lot. A lot of people were critical on, AM talk radio and kind of Ramalama shows, saying, well, what did he think he was going to see? You think you can go into another country and that you're going to walk into a bomb site, you're going to walk into a weapons factory? You obviously thought about that before you went. But did you see anything that you didn't expect to see or that really surprised you, even within whatever parameters they allowed you freedom in?
Mm-hmm. Well, this becomes a trip like this becomes, there are practical issues that aren't focused on in those attacks. One of the things that you do, and that which is why I'd encourage any version of what I did. I'd encourage any American citizen to do to the degree that they have the opportunity. I come at it as a particularly privileged American, and I'm in the lucky club this way, and so I have had the opportunity to go there. But what it does, just to dramatically in that case, is it forces a lot of reading on you. You're on a plane a long time, and you suddenly really invest in something that's very hard to get through all of the subterfuge that's out there in the media, and then the access beyond that. One of the things that was most valuable about the trip, surprisingly, was the interaction with the journalists who spend their lives as war correspondents. And it was a wake-up call for me that there are real journalists. There are people who are really in the trenches and true believers and reporting very accurately and are more frustrated than I am about what's going on once they send their pieces back home and they're reinterpreted, re-edited, reframed. The stories they want to pursue are not being supported by their networks, that sort of thing. But they have perspectives on what's going on there. That's a great dialogue. It's one of the things, in the discrediting campaign, that people like Scott Ritter, a guy who has a meticulous record as a major in the Marine Corps, and then again as a UN inspector. To the man, you hear those kinds of things here in that campaign to discredit him and others. But to the man, in terms of the journalists in Baghdad, Scott Ritter has an impeccable record as a spokesman on the topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was something a little bit like a temper tantrum on the part of the media, as if you had the nerve to go outside their official sources and see for yourself. And I guess they were right in feeling that there's an implicit critique when somebody says, I'm not happy with the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to go see for myself.
Yeah, if the example of qualification is somebody like Mr. O'Reilly, not going over there and making bombastic commentary from here, then I feel that, in that sense, I ought to get a Pulitzer Prize.
Sean, I'm interested in impressions, whether they're poetic, snapshots, stream of consciousness, or whatever, the things that you saw in Iraq that moved you.
The Iraqi people are, as warm as people get. And you could not, for all of the devastation there, for all of the fact that the number one topic of conversation in every Iraqi household are the sanctions. It is the cloud that they live under in a very tangible way every second of every day. There's this incredible spirit and warmth, and I couldn't find anyone who would look at me cross-eyed as an American standing in the streets of Saddam City, in the slums, anywhere. And when you'd go there as a Western face with a camera in your hand, you'd be like a Pied Piper, suddenly surrounded by throngs, hundreds of children, many with visible ailments, garbage all over the streets, and this big, happy smiles. And it's just that one more reminder of, that despite the fact that they're 8,000 miles away in brown, they're just like us and want just the same things that we want. And of Of course, we know that somewhere in our head, but to know that, to really, really make it flesh and blood that way, and to see the kind of courage of humanity under those circumstances, you get back to your microphoned hotel room at the El Rashid Hotel, and you fall on your knees shaking. When I went to the hospital, I thought this also. I thought, I was thinking, we're worrying about dropping bombs on these kids. I don't want them to slam a door too loud down the hallway with this kid who has leukemia because of our uranium on our anti-tank weapons. In 91 has left all of this radioactive material all over the South. And you have these skyrocketing rates of leukemia and these tiny children suffering from it. And we're talking about bombing the place.
Mm-hmm. That's something that strikes me that I don't hear anyone talking about. It's like the United States government going after John Gotti by bombing Brooklyn. I thought it was against the Geneva Conventions to bomb a civilized area. And yet year after year, the number of civilians in warfare as a percentage go up. World War II, it was something like 10%. In Bosnia and Chechnya, it was up like 90%.
Well, this falls under the quote, "It's a new kind of war," and the snowballing acceptance of the term collateral damage. And I think that the vital part of that, it goes to the conversation about rule of law and the ethics of rule of law as it applies domestically, and to what degree our laws represent our convictions versus do they legally extend to a quote-unquote battlefield. That doesn't seem to be the question to me. The question to me is if we are going to consider the values of our country that we're fighting for and willing to kill people for under certain circumstances and to have our people killed, we have to really be clear about what America those soldiers are going to be coming back to. And this goes into the area of civil liberties. It goes into the area of criminality and Americanism. And I think that until there is evidence, which is again a rule of law concept, until there is evidence of a real immediate threat to this country by Iraq, that it is patently immoral for us to attack.
What advice could you offer people like yourself who have misgivings about the information they're receiving, or who feel manipulated, or who are uncertain as to what the facts are, but don't have the recourses like yourself to go to Iraq, to see it firsthand? What can you make any suggestions as to avenues that they could pursue to educate themselves?
Well, there's educating themselves, and there's also registering protest once educated. I think there's, all of it could be considered pissing in the wind on the wrong day, But certainly, in terms of protest, there's letter writing. And protest is an interesting topic. It's something I talked about yesterday. I think the point in that is that democracy is no democracy without participation, whether it's dissent or otherwise. Dissent got us here.
Dissent got us here.
And it's not a long-standing tradition that should be applauded. It's a human cry that needs to be heard. To educate the country in such a way as to pique that cry in people so that they can demand the information that they need, and to know where to look for it is difficult, because you've got an economy now where people are working 2 jobs. They're coming home, they barely have enough time to kiss their kid, put their feet up, and what's on television that's informing them is Bill O'Reilly. I think that it's upon them, to the degree that you can find it. It's a tough road that way, and it's upon any of us, and particularly our administration and the media, to force each other into a higher responsibility to our own and to those abroad.
You've just given the perfect rationale for the active opposition. Thanks.